Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Sedecase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode is a very, very special one. I have with me returning guest, Jonathan Matheson. We're going to be talking about his book, Why It's Okay to Not Think for Yourself. Why It's Okay Not to Think for Yourself. Boom. It's a Routledge book. It's brand new. It's an epistemology book, but it's I don't know, it's like pitched at the popular level, so everyone can read it, but it's got good old arguments in here. He's a great writer, so I highly recommend this book. I'm excited for it. We're going to get into it in just a second, but I wanted to mention that there's a Routledge 20% off link in the description for this book. So you can go find that link right now in the description and grab this book for 20% off. It's really fun. It's really fun to think about. It will help you become a better epistemologist yourself and help you form your own beliefs on the matter. Like, is it okay to ever not think for yourself? What do we think? I also want to mention that this episode is brought to you in part by Murdy Creative Co. Murdy Creative is an amazing leather goods company. They make really, really cool journal covers. They make really cool briefcases. I love this guy. I love his work. I love the whole company. And right now we're teaming up to bring my audience 10% off their entire order. So follow the link in the description and use promo code Parker Notes, all caps, at checkout. That's Parker Notes in all caps at checkout for 10% off your entire order. Follow the link in the description wherever you're getting this podcast at to support this podcast and get 10% off your whole order. Another way you can support this podcast is by becoming a Patreon patron. You can find the link in the description. If you guys, the reason it's Parker Notes for Murdy Creative is because that channel's huge and this channel is very, very small. If you guys like the niche content that I'm bringing to you, then you got to support your boy. So support me on Patreon or YouTube members. If you don't want to see me go all mainstream and broaden out the topics, if you like the niche stuff and all the topics I get into, then please support me. That's probably enough commodification. Let's get on with the show and talk with John Matheson about why it's okay not to think for yourself. Boom. Dude, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
I appreciate the invite. It's great. Great as always to have a conversation with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. Well, first off, like, how did you get started thinking about this idea?
Yeah. So it was probably, 2019-ish. As I started the book, there was a open letter written by a bunch of professors from Stanford, Yale, a couple Ivy League schools, and they wrote an open letter to incoming freshmen, giving them some advice. And their number one piece of advice was to think for yourselves. And something about that struck me as like obviously right. That seems like good advice. I want my students to think for themselves. But at the same time, something didn't sit quite right with that. And, thinking for yourself, I think is, there's some good stuff that comes along with that. But, just because someone thinks for themselves, that's not really all that impressive all on its own.
Yeah.
And that what made that a little more puzzling is as I was thinking about, as when we're thinking about something, when we're inquiring, we're trying to figure out the answer to our question. And, for almost any question you want to think about, someone else is better at answering that than you are. Right. So for very few things am I the best at answering that question, like probably about my immediate environment and my relatively recent past. But for everything else, there's probably someone better. So that's the tension that kind of drove this kind of long project, thinking about epistemic autonomy and eventually to the book, is how do we reconcile this tension between, on the one hand, there's something good about thinking for yourself, but on the other hand, anything you can think about, someone else can think about better. And so what's, how do we deal with that tension? Where do we find the right balance? So that's what led to the whole thing. It actually, so much of philosophy, I think, starts with an answer that you already have, and then you kind of do the back roads argument to where you were going to get. This one was honest philosophy, maybe we'll call it. Like, it really did start with a puzzle and a question, where I had no idea where it was going to end up. And like you, I have a little bit of discomfort about where it ended up. it's a little bit triggering. We can say that. That's okay.
That's good. Yeah. Well, I guess as you mentioned in the book, it's good to get clear on this stuff. So, what does it mean to think for yourself? What do we have in mind when we're saying that?
Yeah. So I think that's where maybe a lot of the resistance to the conclusion might come from. Um, and, because I do mean something a little bit particular by thinking for yourself. So I don't know that there's any sort of universal idea of what it means to think for yourself, but it has to be something more than just using your brain, since I figure like using your brain is inevitable, like that anytime anytime you have a belief at all, you're using your brain in some capacity. So thinking for yourself has to be more than that to have this question be an
Well,
interesting
for
question.
now, until the Neuralinks come out, and then we don't need to use our brain even. Yeah.
Fair enough. I didn't mean to stake a claim on other contentious
That's good.
philosophical questions. So the way I thought about it is to divide kind of two ways that you might go about inquiring into a question. And the other one being deference. So when you defer to someone else, you take them at their word. So you believe what they tell you, and you believe them because they told you so. So not that you don't have reasons, but your reasons for believing it are entirely reasons about that speaker, about that person, reasons to trust them. You don't have the information that they are basing their belief on. So that's what I take this kind of idea of deference to be the alternative. Thinking for yourself then is when you do have the relevant evidence and arguments for yourself. You've acquired the evidence, you've made your own assessment of it, and you've tried to come to grips with what that evidence supports. So the way I want to think about thinking for yourself is really just what kind of evidence are you using? Are you using what I called in the book like direct reasons, or reasons that are pointing towards the answer directly, or are they more indirect reasons that just point to the reliability or trustworthiness of some other source?
I really like that distinction that you made in the book, and it's helpful to because this isn't like an irrational deference. It's still, indirect reasons are still reasons. So you
Right.
still can have justification or whatever you want to add in for your beliefs to get knowledge. And in deference, not like indifference or anything. In cases of deference, you're trusting that. I guess, do you need that maxim that evidence of evidence is evidence in order for deference to be like a justifiable thing? Are you basing deference on the fact that whoever you're deferring to has evidence and your evidence is their evidence?
There is this kind of platitude that evidence of evidence is evidence, and I think different people think of that in different ways. And so I don't know if I want to commit to
Okay.
that necessarily. I do want to say this though, that it can be reasonable to believe something on the basis of someone else saying so, right?
Yeah.
On the when the only reasons you have are reasons to trust them. So if we want to cash that out in terms of the same evidence of evidence is evidence, then I think that's fine.
Yeah.
What's important is that in my pictures, you don't actually have the evidence that they're working with, right?
Yeah.
So the evidence that they're basing their belief on is opaque to you. You
Yeah.
may know that they have it. You may know that they are an informed, rational individual, but you don't know why they believe what they believe.
And is it synonymous with like testimonial evidence, or is there important like distinctions here? I'm trying to think. I'm thinking, I guess someone wouldn't have to testify in order for you to defer to them, right? Like maybe you just have someone else told you that they know about this person or something like that.
Yeah, certainly wouldn't have to be like spoken.
Yeah.
Uh, Shoot, I just lost what I was going to say.
Test- Testimonial deference doesn't have to be
Oh,
spoken.
so that there can also, I mean, they aren't totally mutually exclusive options as well, right?
Yeah.
So you can hear someone can give you testimony to some proposition or some claim, and you can also think about it for yourself, right? Then
Right.
you're not deferring because you're not believing them just on the basis of their say so,
Yeah.
but they still gave you testimony, and their testimony may still be part of your evidence. It's just you've also acquired direct reasons, and that's part of the mix. Part of your evidential mix includes some evidence that you have for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like this part of it, and I like the deferring to experts type stuff. I think it's going to get fun when we talk about like disagreement, expertise, disagreement amongst experts, and how we pick those out without thinking about ourselves or thinking for ourselves maybe. But before we do that, another thing to get clear on is like what in deferring, we're deferring to experts, right? So you make this, you also make a distinction between experts. Is it experts and novices?
Yeah.
Is that the yeah? Okay, so can you help us out with those two too?
Sure. I mean, let me just throw in one thing first. So I do think that there's already a little bit of discomfort, I think, in the way I frame that second chapter, which is believing something just because someone else does, right? So
Yeah,
I do think that there's already some discomfort. Right? If I said to you, "Oh, you only believe that because someone else believes it," we feel uncomfortable a little bit with that, but I think that's a misplaced discomfort as well, because like you said, any sort of expert testimony is going to work like that, and a vast portion of our knowledge and our beliefs come to us by way of testimony where we don't have direct
yeah,
access to the relevant reasons, and so we have to, I think, embrace the idea that it can be rational to believe something just because someone else says so. But yeah, so I distinguish between experts and novices, and I don't want too much to hang on any particular way that gets broken up. What's really, I think, important for me is that there are people who are better and worse positioned to answer questions.
yeah,
And so however we want to think about your epistemic position, like I think some pretty plausible candidates are that it matters what evidence you have or how much evidence you have, how much you've thought about it, what sort of intellectual virtues you have, but the idea that some people are better positioned to answer some questions than other people. And so I'm really using expert in just that sense of someone who's better off than I am. Other more precise accounts of expertise might want to draw a threshold for like experts have to be at least so good.
yeah.
But I think what's most important for the project I want to do is just that they're better than you, that you'd be better in terms of getting the answer right. You'd be better off going with them than you would be going it on your own.
Okay, yeah. That's good. That's helpful. There, this is a series, which I didn't know about until this book, but it's a whole like why it's okay series. So
Yeah.
you didn't pick the full title here because it's got to fit in the series. But
Yeah.
you also defend the okay, or you define it. So like what do you mean by okay? Um, it's okay. Why it's okay for you not to think for yourself? What does the okay mean?
That's a perfectly fine way to live your life. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah,
And in particular, I'm concerned with your intellectual life. So is there anything wrong intellectually or epistemically? So there's lots of different normative spheres in which we can evaluate our actions. And to evaluate the morality of thinking for yourself or the pragmatic value of thinking for yourself, there's going to be a lot of other factors that are going to feature into that discussion. I think your intellectual responsibilities will be part of that discussion. So I do think that the book and the arguments therein help do something toward an answer to those
yeah,
other kinds of normativity. But my focus is just on what's epistemically all right. So from the epistemic perspective, how should we think about someone who doesn't think about something for themselves? And that's what I want to say. There's nothing problematic about it.
okay. So I don't think these claims are equivalent, but the claim that it's okay to not think for yourself and the claim that it's okay to never think for yourself, or is it okay to never think for yourself? Because one's like bare permission. I guess they're both permissive, right? But one's like it ranges over a broader category, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, one question is whether it's even possible to never
Right,
think for yourself.
right.
And I don't, I think that's a difficult question. I don't know that I want to say that I even want to defend the never answer, but I do
Okay.
want to say it's okay to do a lot less thinking for yourself than what we think. So, like, there can be massive amounts of thinking that we outsource. So, the parallel I draw, um, which in my mind I think helps a lot, is to think about home improvement projects
Yeah.
because I'm not at all I'm not at all handy, and so this was a little bit of like me reassuring myself that that's okay.
That's good.
Um, so for any house project, there's someone else who's better, who's better than I am at performing that repair or that fix. Maybe there's some things that I'm as good as anyone else is, but they're really small and trivial, like changing easy to reach light bulbs
Yeah,
or something like
same.
that. So would it be okay to never, would it be okay to never do any home repairs? Yeah, maybe, but maybe there are some things that I would be, the best at. Just like in the intellectual case, things about like my immediate environment and my close past. Maybe it would be a problem for me to defer on those matters because I would be taking a suboptimal route to those answers.
Mm.
So I don't want to say never. I do want to say for a lot less, right? So it's hard to put. I know it's kind of fuzzy and hedgy, and it's not nice to put, to quantify in these kind of vague ways, but that a life that's full of outsourcing, that has a
Yeah.
lot of deference in it, is perfectly okay. Even
Yeah.
if we can't do full entire outsourcing.
Okay, that's good. It is hedgy because I'm like, well, now I got some cases, but I don't have the cases if you don't go with the never. You did the home improvements and like the gardening and stuff. You mentioned Rico and Rhonda in the book,
Yeah.
and I think Rhonda like she does everything with her hands, and she takes care of her own house. And then there's Rico who outsources. He pays everyone to do it. And I think the claim was that like both equally have tidy houses,
Their
but
house is in order.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Their house is in order. But I wonder like attributing like praiseworthiness or not. Like is one more praiseworthy than the other? And I think the intuitions might come apart on that. Because I would
Sure.
think Rhonda would be more praiseworthy. So but I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's right. There's a lot
Okay.
of things that she's accomplished that Rico hasn't accomplished. Um, but I think that's okay. So there's
Well,
nothing wrong with living a life that's less praiseworthy than someone else's life.
right. Yeah, so that's an interesting point that I wanted to think about in regards to your conclusion. If it's okay to not think for yourself, then does that make thinking for yourself like an act of supererogation or like more praiseworthy, or is it like just unnecessary? And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, you thought for yourself, but who cares? You didn't need to.
Yeah. I think it can go a lot of different ways.
Mm,
So in some cases, I do think that there are intellectual goods that you can only get by thinking for yourself.
okay.
And so to go above and beyond and get those goods, that would be epistemically supererogatory. You're going
Okay.
above and beyond, and you got a better intellectual state than you needed to get. Sometimes I think it is just kind of meh, it's neutral. Like the thinking for yourself, you could have done it or not done it. No, no advantage was had by doing that.
Yeah.
But I also think sometimes it can actually have a negative impact, right? So sometimes thinking for yourself can enter confusions and mislead you. And so you might end up being in a worse intellectual space for having thought about things for yourself, where you would have been better off if you had just deferred.
Yeah.
So I think it can go in any of those ways. You
Mm.
can make things better, you can make things worse, you can leave things the same. But in each of those scenarios, I want to say there's nothing wrong with just not doing it, with not taking on that extra thing of thinking for yourself.
Huh, yeah. Okay, that's good. I wonder how you would know before you started the project whether it's gonna lead you
Yeah.
into worse, neutral, or better.
Yeah. Hard to know. And I think that's another part of the reason why it's okay not to think for yourself is some
Yeah.
of those goods like understanding. So understanding is one epistemic good that I think you can only get by thinking about things for yourself. You can't
Oh, okay.
you can't really grasp it and see it for yourself if you're not wrestling with the reasons on your own.
Yeah.
So if you can get that, great. Now, how good are we at determining whether or not we can that understanding is in the cards for us if we were to think about it for ourselves, right? So if I'm honest with myself and I'm thinking about some complicated mathematical theorem, I can know that I can know that it's true by deference to a mathematician. I could think, wouldn't it be better if I understood it and like could see for myself why it's true? Yeah, that'd be better. To do that, I'd have to think about it for myself. Great. But if I did, how likely would it be that I would actually come to understand it? And I think for me, in a complicated mathematical theorem, I'm thinking it's pretty unlikely. So, maybe there's some decision theory that then comes in terms of like whether or not it's a good idea. But either way, I still think it's fine to not do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Understanding being one of the intellectual goods is really good. Um, this doesn't really hinge. This doesn't have any. This is peripheral. But you're an epistemologist, so I could ask you: do you think you could have understanding if someone implanted? Can someone implant understanding into your cognitive network or your belief neurotic structure or something? Could they put that in there, or do you have to actually do the hard work of chewing on it yourself for it to count as understanding?
Yeah, I think you have to put in the work. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to think about implanted mental states.
Yeah.
Um, but just think of it this way, like knowledge. Let's just think about regular testimonial transmission.
Hmm.
Um, I can get knowledge by someone else just telling me the answer to a question, especially if I know that they're a reliable, well-informed individual. But I can't get understanding by them just telling me the answer. I'm going to have to put in some intellectual work. So
Mm.
the example that I like to think about is, students in my symbolic logic class. I can tell them that the two sides of De Morgan's law are logically equivalent
Yeah.
statement forms, and they trust me, so they believe me, and so I think that they can know on the basis of their trust in me that they're logically equivalent statement forms,
Yeah.
but they don't get it, most of them. And then maybe, a couple days or a couple weeks later, they do grasp it and they get it. And they got this better epistemic state of understanding, or at least a better degree of understanding. But that is something I think I couldn't just impart to them by words or by any
Mm.
sort of like neural implant either. Like that grasping, I think, does take intellectual work on your
Mm.
own.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And it takes them recollecting it from a previous life when they were back in the forms.
If that's your view about things, then yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's good. Um, okay, that's good. So back to it. There's a couple ways I want to go. Maybe preview of things to come. I want to talk about victim blaming, flat Earth, and Nazis, groupthink, and Socratic questions, and maybe self knowledge. So that's just
Talk about your
a,
teasers.
yeah. That's just a warning. I'm trying to keep myself honest here. So let's go with flat Earth first. So I can imagine flat Earth looking into the evidence for yourself, putting you in a worse situation than otherwise, based on your geographic location and your ability to charter a plane or something like that, right? Like if you can't do any of those things and you're just sitting in your armchair, maybe you come to a worse position if you're just researching on YouTube. But I also wonder about deferring to different experts. So you come across a guy who is a university professor and he's a flat earther and he's really sharp epistemologist. And he's like, hey, look, I think the earth is flat and here's why. And you have another expert who says that guy's a kook. So like, how do you, if it's okay to not think for yourself and defer, don't you have to think for yourself in adjudicating between the two experts that you're trying to defer to?
Yeah, good. Um, I don't think so.
Okay.
So let's try to fill out why. And I'm gonna kind of revisit the practical analogy, right? So suppose you have two plumbers, first
Hmm.
of all, and they diagnose different problems with your plumbing, different explanations as for why there's flooding in your basement. Do you have to think for yourself in order to determine which plumber is trustworthy? I think no, or I sure hope not, because I'm going to do really bad at that, right? Because
Mm.
they can both tell me really plausible stories that from my layperson point of view, sound equally good, right? They can each point to funny looking parts and say things. How am I going to determine which plumber to go with? I think what I have to do is either, resort to other additional experts
Okay.
or to some crowd outsourcing about the general state of plumbing or the reliability of these individual plumbers, but that's still relying on other people's assessment of the individuals in question, right? So I think the same thing in like the flat earth case. You might have two people. Me, from my novice point of view, I'm going to have a hard time perhaps determining which of those two I ought to trust. But there are other experts, other people who are better positioned than I am to weigh in on the debate. And there's also right, it's like an appeal to the general state of the debate
Yeah.
and like how the numbers align for the relevant experts. And I can talk to other people to help me navigate who to trust and why to trust them. I can do all of that without looking at each individual's arguments and evidence for or against flat earth theory and
Yeah.
evaluating that for myself. So given that I'm not going to be very good at doing that, my own evaluation of their evidence and reasons isn't going to give me a good indication of which of these experts is more trustworthy or more or reliable on the issue.
So maybe this is like moving the goalpost, but I'm wondering, in the case of the plumbers, you might, without going to a third plumber, maybe you're like, hey, look, I'm just going to get more answers here. I'm going to evaluate. I'm not in a position to evaluate their expertise as a plumber, but I am a human being, and I can evaluate them based on trustworthiness. Do I think this guy is trustworthy and telling me the right story, or is he trying to upsell me or something like that? Is that does that change the case too much? And am I cheating here by saying, like, instead of looking at the relevant details in which they're an expert, I'm looking at their personal moral character instead? I'm trying to evaluate that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's okay. But I mean, again, I don't want to be committed to it being wrong to think for yourself,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So
right,
that
right.
is an option. All that I want
Okay.
to commit to is that there's nothing wrong if you do outsource that question between which plumber should I go with to someone else, right? So if
Yeah.
you want to take it on yourself, then maybe that's fine. If I don't, all that I want to say is that there's nothing deficient about my course of action by relying on someone else or some other group to help make that determination.
Okay. So, um, if you were to, oh wow, I'm trying to wrestle with this. If you were to try to understand the problem in your basement, you that would be maybe an act of super irrigation, but there'd be an intellectual good that you'd get. You'd start to understand plumbing perhaps more, and you could say, "Look, that's a waste of time," but it also could be beneficial in that it would help you adjudicate between these two guys, or in the future, it would help you understand more plumbing. So it's like,
Sure.
in that case, how do we go about weighing the choices? So, okay, it's still, I guess it's your claim is just that it's okay, but in this case, I want to
So
say, like, is does the goods outweigh the okayness such
yeah.
that it's no longer like a viable option, or it's not as permissible or something because
Yeah.
the goods you're leaving on the table is too high or something.
So I mean, think of it this way: like one great way to evaluate between the plumbers is to become a plumber yourself, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it'd be a long term way to solve the goal, but
It's
like you go to plumbing school, become a plumber, and then
yeah,
you can help distinguish. And you're saying, and thrown in bonus, now you're also a plumber, and so
yeah,
you have this whole skill set that you didn't have before. So again, I want to say, great, that's a great way to live your life. That's
yeah,
fine. But if someone else says, you know what, I don't want to do that. I want to live my life in a different way.
yeah,
That's perfectly fine. There's not an intellectual defect in
yeah.
not taking on that intellectual work yourself. Yes, you are going to miss out on some goods. Like
Mm,
you'd be able to problem solve things that you won't be able to if you don't put in that effort, but that's okay
yeah.
because you have this great resource, namely all these other people who already have this skill mastered and these answers figured out.
Mm. Yeah, this is good. I wonder if this applies to more abstruse uh, ethical questions and just random like game theory questions. Like, You familiar with like Newcomb's paradox?
Hmm.
So I think now people are more like two boxers than one boxing.
Okay.
From what I've heard. Can I just be like, hey, look, dude, I don't know. I don't want to think about Newcomb's paradox. If more people are going in for two boxing, then I'm a two boxer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think so. This is where, my views about disagreement are gonna pop up too, which is that I don't think it's just a pure matter of like the numbers, right? So if it's like 52, 48, it's not like, oh, we should all be two boxers now.
Yeah.
Like I think, when I would consider that what I call like the debate to be in a state of disarray where there's no clear consensus, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the thing to do in a case like that is to suspend judgment. So there'd have to be, I think, a clear consensus view amongst relevant experts. So like there is in the flat Earth case, I mean, against the flat Earth view, but there's not in the Newcomb paradox case because the views there are too, they're too equally dispersed. Even if there's not a perfect equilibrium, it's still kind of chaos.
So that's a really helpful point. So how might we know which areas it's okay to not think? So when it comes to Newcomb's paradox, it may not be okay to not think for yourself because
No, I would still say you shouldn't think for yourself. I mean, not that you shouldn't, but that it's okay
yeah,
not to think
almost
for yourself.
gotcha. Yeah.
um, because look, think of it this way: the world's best and brightest people collectively can't figure this out.
Yeah.
How weird would it be to then think, but luckily I'm here to save the day. I'm going to think about it, and by adding my intellectual efforts, I'm going to come to the conclusion that is now supported by um, the evidence. Right? That this is what I call the evidential swamping argument in the book,
Yeah.
which is the evidence you have about the state of the debate is so strong, it's going to outweigh any sort of like evidence that you get from thinking about it for yourself. Right.
Yeah.
So I think this is in the book too, but the kind of view or the anecdote that I have in the back of my head for this is like the undergraduate student in Intro to Philosophy who says, like, we had this module on free will, we looked at these different views about free will, and he's like, I've thought about it for myself, and here's the answer. And I think, well, I mean, think I don't say this to my students directly, but good for you. Like you thought about it for yourself. That's what I wanted you to do. But don't at all think that by having thought about it for yourself for 2 weeks, you're then like rationally entitled to this conclusion.
Yeah.
After all, think about all these smart philosophers who are way more informed than you are, way more intelligent than you are, way more intellectually virtuous than you are. They can't collectively figure it out. So the fact that you've thought about it for yourself for 2 weeks, again, fine, good, great, and that's what I wanted you to do. But that doesn't mean that you're rational in believing the conclusion that you came to.
Right. So the swamping gets me. It makes me nervous because then I think does that person have a reason to continue on to become a philosopher of free will because
Yeah.
they have all this evidence that it's like the state of disarray or something like that. It seems like if you have all this evidence that the world's greatest philosophers who study this stuff for years can't come to a conclusion, it seems like it would be irrational maybe for you to think that you can do it, right? Unless you have like a well, yeah, even with like a bland indifference principle, right? Okay, so you're
Yeah.
like, even if you're generally as smart as them, unless you think you're way smarter than them, there's no reason for you to continue on.
Well, so I wouldn't go there. So I mean, I do think it wouldn't be rational for you to think that you're going to figure it out, right? So I
Okay.
mean, if you're, if you're the undergrad, the grad student, the postdoc, the assistant professor, at whatever level, I think it's probably not reasonable for anyone to be thinking, well, I'm going to solve this philosophical problem.
Huh.
It's not going to happen. Or it's not reasonable for us to think it's going to happen given the vast, disagreement and contentiousness that surrounds philosophy. Does that mean it's not worth doing? No. I mean, I love doing philosophy. It's a lot of fun. You get paid to think about tough issues. One of my, it reminds me of a conversation I had with one of my kids when they were younger, and because they were asking why I was working on a paper as a teacher, that seemed kind of strange to them, and they they asked me, well, have any of your ideas been right? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like they seem pretty good to me. And then they were just kind of like flabbergasted. Like, do you get in trouble when they're wrong? And I'm like, no, it's okay as long as you're
Yeah.
wrong in the right way.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly fine way to be a philosopher.
Mhm.
And so I mean, there's something weird about that. Wouldn't it be better if we could, solve all these problems?
Yeah.
Yes, it's probably not going to happen, but I don't think that means it's not worthwhile doing. I mean, especially if you enjoy doing it, great, go do it. But it's also not a requirement, right? So if someone else thinks like, oh, look, philosophy, they have these problems, they haven't been able to figure them out. I probably wouldn't be able to figure them out either. I'm going to go do something else instead. Great. I
Mm.
mean, that's perfectly fine. Like that's the kind of sort of like common sense, ordinary person that I'm trying to defend in the book, right? That you don't have to go and figure everything out.
Yeah. So, um, this is so good. That reminded me just randomly. There was this funny meme I came across where it was like a STEM major making fun of philosophy majors, and it was like, "Oh dang, I have a thought due on Friday." And at first I was like, "Oh, that's just like normal." And then I understood why everyone else thought that was funny because they have like projects due, and we just have to like think of things
Yeah.
and present our thoughts. And it was really funny that I didn't get it at first, but um I don't know. So I think the gambler's fallacy is like something like, "Hey, I'm gonna gamble because someone has to win." Is that right? Someone has to
I
win, so
think
it
it's
might as well be
usually
me?
like having lost,
Oh, yeah.
you think that you're more likely to win the next one
Right. Okay.
because
Okay.
the odds will you connect the odds over the
I can't
sequence
lose
as opposed
again.
to each individual event on its own, right?
Yeah. Right. So what's the is there one that says like someone has to win, so it might as well be me or
That does sound like a fallacy.
yeah.
I don't know if that one's named. You can
Yeah.
get your
And
name on there.
yeah, that's right. Parker's fallacy. I just wonder about that when it comes to the question, I was just asking about like solving the problem, right? Where it's like, it's unlikely that I can solve it. I don't have any reason to think I could solve it more than anyone else. But if someone has to solve it, or if someone's going to solve it, might as well be me because there's been other problems that look like they were insoluble, and then someone solved them. So I wonder if that's a I guess that's a
Yeah.
fallacy, maybe. Like,
Well, but I mean, I think you can press that problem more, like take it outside philosophy, take it into engineering, say, where the student does show promise in engineering. It is reasonable for them to think that they will uncover new truths and beneficial things in engineering if they pursue that path.
yeah,
Um, are they intellectually required to do that? Um, no, I think no. Like, suppose they want to be a violinist instead.
yeah.
Great,
Well,
that's fine. It's
so
perfectly fine to not pursue that intellectual trajectory, even if you knew that there were these intellectual benefits that were awaiting for you if you took that course of action.
So I'm thinking more in light of the swamping and the state of disarray. So it
Hmm.
would be like if there was a really tough puzzle in engineering, and you were like, "Well, I'm going to solve this," and it's like, "Well, you you shouldn't think that you are going to solve that because the world's experts haven't." But
Right.
but then that might disincentivize like the true geniuses or whoever who've gone on. I wish if I were
Yeah.
smarter, I would have a good example for you and
Yeah.
be like, "Well,
No,
look
I
at
mean,
Newton did this,"
yeah.
you know?
Because I mean, that's the word that people have brought up. It's like, if everyone follows this kind of like get out of thinking for yourself free card,
Yeah.
and then we will run out of experts. No one will be an expert, and then we'll be stuck in a terrible intellectual space. So there is, I think, a kind of collective action problem where it is important that we have experts, and it's important that we have experts in this wide, diverse array of disciplines. But I don't think that translates to any individual responsibility
Yeah.
that you or that some one individual thereby has to pursue a certain set of questions or particular intellectual endeavors, even if more generally as like a society we have this responsibility. I
Yeah.
don't think it trickles down to any individual.
Okay. That's that's good. These
And you
puzzles.
think that too, because I mean, if someone's talking to you about what they should major in, and they want to do something else, I you're going to tell them, fine, do that. Do what you really enjoy. Go
I
study
do the
that.
math. I do the math. I say I told the last three guys not to do this, so now I have to tell you to do it because I because no,
Got
I
to meet
don't
my
do that.
quota of
That's right.
engineering
Yeah,
recommendations.
that's right. I want to talk about victim blaming. I
Yeah.
don't. This isn't one that would come naturally to me, but we talked about this in Chicago, and someone might have this in mind and say, "Well, look, if you're telling people not, it's okay to not think for yourself, then you're going to put them in situations wherein they become victims of all sorts of different types of abuse."
Yeah.
And I know, this is a problem that people raise. I really liked your reply to this, so I wanted to put it
Yeah.
on air for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most uncomfortable objection, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it put in its strongest form, the objection saying, isn't your advice facilitating all kinds of abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse?
Yeah.
Because people can take advantage of their power and their intellectual power to manipulate other people, and if they aren't thinking for themselves, aren't we then like exacerbating the problem? So, I mean, I obviously want to agree that that's a problem, like that,
Mm.
that sort of abuse of power is problematic and terrible. Where I disagree is in thinking that the solution is in thinking for yourself. And I guess there's two reasons for that. The first is if we say the solution or the best way to prevent these abuses is to think for yourself, I do think that that at least facilitates a kind of victim blaming,
Yeah.
because why did this abuse happen? Well, the individual in question didn't think for themselves. If only they had thought for themselves, they could see that they were being manipulated and taken advantage of. Um, that sounds like we're blaming them, that
Yeah.
that it was their intellectual failing that led to their abuse. And I think that's exactly backwards. Like
Right.
what allows for that abuse to happen, unfortunately, is because people can be rationally following their evidence. They have good reasons to trust these people in power and in intellectual positions of power. That power can be abused, and when it's abused, it's a terrible thing. But it's not because the individual in question is being irrational or believing irrational. So
Yeah.
I think instead the solution has to be safeguards that are in place, but in a better intellectual position. So other experts, right? Other experts safeguarding lay people from experts, and in groups, right? In terms of like there being institutional safeguards for people. Like so in the the case I talk about in the book is based on an objection that Jennifer Lackey brings up about predatory experts in USA gymnastics. And I think the solution that they came up with is instructive, right? Which was, if you see anything or think or feel anything that seems a little bit off, report it. You're required to report it. You don't have to first be rational in believing that there's a problem, right?
Mm.
Because I think you're not, as a novice, in a position where you can rationally come to those conclusions. But anything even seems off, it's irrational, fine, still have to report it, because then when that happens at the institutional level, we can identify problems that
Mm.
no individual could rationally identify on their own.
Yeah.
Right. So the thinking for yourself, I think, is not the way out of the problem. It's by relying on either other experts or on institutions to use their positions of power and intellectual power to help protect us.
Mm. Yeah. I thought that was such a good move, but also like a really helpful move to be like, hey, look, let's not blame the victims and make things worse and like slap them on the wrist because you should have known better. Like no, you shouldn't have known better,
Right.
and it is
Yeah.
reasonable. I I think that's a good point to emphasize because even backing off of like sexual abuse stuff, um, and just think about like the government abuse, and it's like wake up, sheeple, think for yourselves. That's Rage Against the Machine talking about it in their songs or something. Um, it's like a warning against that. But well, I want to go to the Nazi case. Let me go to the Nazi case because
Okay.
uh, it's like it's closely related. But now these people are abusers, and they say, "Hey, look, I was just following orders," and it looks like um, if it's if it's rational for them to not think for themselves, I'm in this position where I'm a soldier. I shouldn't think for myself. I've been commanded to do something. If I were in a position to think for myself, perhaps
Oh, I
I
see.
would not do this, but I'm not because what do I know, man? I'm just a foot soldier, so I do what I'm told. And so at the Nuremberg trials, we want to say like, no, you ought to have known there's a higher law above this. You should have thought for yourself and not done this. Does this excuse that? What do you think about that?
Good. I wasn't sure where you were going at first, but now I see the problem. I think no, I don't think that this excuses that. I think that there's a domain shifting there, right?
Okay.
So, is there anything intellectually wrong with the soldier who doesn't figure out the details of what's going on? Um, I think, well, if you set the case up right, then there might not be any intellectual failing. There
Okay.
still could be a moral failing, right? It still could be morally wrong to do certain actions,
Mm.
and it still could be true that you ought to have known, even if it wasn't true, that you should think about it for yourself. So, I mean,
Oh,
I think one, I don't think the intellectual charge is the primary charge that we want to level against that person, right? It's the moral charge,
okay.
and the moral charge can stick without the intellectual charge sticking.
That's fascinating. So, how I'm trying to think, how would they have ought how do they have culpable ignorance in Nazi Germany circa 1942 or whatever, where like they were raised to hate a certain group of people. They all their friends and family, all the experts told them that these are bad people. Like, um, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm a Christian, so I'm like, well, it's written on their heart or something. But I don't know. What do you make of that?
yeah. Um, I mean, I think there's hard moral questions, especially. I mean, not. I don't want to say it's a hard moral questions like is is the Nazi wrong? That's not the
Yeah.
hard moral.
Right.
But there are hard moral questions, I think, in particular, that connect your intellectual life to your moral life,
Yeah.
and to what extent your ignorance can excuse you, and in what situations it can't.
Yeah.
Um, and living a taking unnecessary moral risks, I think, can be itself morally problematic.
Hmm.
Even if you don't know exactly what it is that you're doing.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't think I have a good, nice, firm answer in terms of how to think about it. Because I'm part of me's trying to connect it to things that I've said about moral risk and being morally cautious. So I have defended the claim that sometimes when you're in a bad intellectual environment, that can change what's morally permissible for you to do, or
Right.
more directly, what's morally impermissible for you to do. So I do think that there can be cases where we set up the intellectual environment in the right way, and it can have moral effects in
Yeah.
terms of like things that now are morally wrong for you that wouldn't be morally wrong otherwise. But I think there are just hard questions in terms of like, what do you have to know about morality in order to be responsible for your actions? Like, do you have to know that killing people like this is morally wrong? Do you have to have thought about it, or is it enough that you should have thought about it? That you
Yeah.
that you sh- that you're responsible because you didn't think about it.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. This is tricky stuff. Well, let's go with the Socratic objection. I forgot which chapter this is. Chapter 6. And this is the one where I'm like I'm pretty much obsessed with philosophy. I have I think 6 YouTube channels on philosophy and I think about it a lot.
You might have a
Uh
problem.
yeah, man. But Socratic objection is like that's the one where I'm like I want to make people think about these questions. And
Yeah.
it would be a real boon to my YouTube presence if I could make people think that they're obliged to think about this. And you're, but you're,
They're definitely obliged to donate, so
that's right.
I'll
All right.
back you there. But I don't know
Okay.
if they're obliged to think for
Yeah.
themselves.
So can you just give us a crispy definition of Socratic objection?
Yeah, so I call the Socratic objection from the famous line that the unexamined life is not worth living, and so the worry there is that aren't there some questions that everyone should think about for themselves, right?
Mm.
So even if there's many domains where thinking for yourself is unnecessary, aren't there some, like the precious ones, where everyone is required to think about it for themselves? And I too feel a lot of pull. In part, as a philosopher too, I love those questions. I love thinking about those questions.
Yeah.
I too want everyone to think about those questions. But is that me just wanting everyone to enjoy what I enjoy? Maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but I want to say that there is no good reason to treat questions about politics or morality or religion. I think those are kind of like the most plausible candidates as special or immune from the kind of argument that I give in the book, that thinking for yourself is not required.
Yeah. So
And
I
in brief, it's as long as there are facts of the matter, and there are better and worse ways of uncovering those facts, I think things hold.
yeah.
And so, as long as you think that there are facts about whether God exists and that some people are better at figuring that out than others, then you have a reason to, that the arguments from other domains apply equally well to those.
So maybe ironically, if you were like a Wittgensteinian or something, and you're like, or I don't know, a logical positivist, and you're like, look, these make no sense anyways, then the argument may not hold for you, and maybe you should become a philosopher of religion.
If I mean, I don't know if so. There's a lot to bracket, but if it was reasonable for you to think that these are nonsense questions,
Then you just go with
it's
nonsense.
hard to see why then you'd have a responsibility to think about them for yourself, because there's no sense to be made there.
There's no sense to be made. So there's no one who's better or worse at coming to answers on that question. But I think that I have answers to that question because of my
Well, if
logical
you
positivism.
think you have, well, I don't know. Maybe if it's nonsense, if you think it's nonsense, I don't know that you can also think that you have answers or that you can get
Isn't
answers.
that the oh yeah, okay, so maybe you can't get answers, but that is one meta answer to the category, right? There are no answers.
Yes.
So that is
But if there's
in a
no
sense,
answers, then I don't know. Then I mean, again, if you want to think about it for yourself, great, because you're just enjoying the play.
yeah.
But you're not going to find anything. So there wouldn't be any intellectual responsibility for you to do that, because there's no intellectual goods there for you to gain.
There's no goods for me to gain here. So I have no response. Okay, so it'd be a waste of an effort to try and go and do that. They don't get to use the not think for yourself argument though, because they don't think anyone has better reasons. I'm trying
There's
to
no reason to
hoist them.
defer. So you've
Yeah,
lost a
right,
reason to defer, but you
right.
haven't gained a reason to think about it for yourself.
Yeah. Dang it, man. Don't do that. I want to force these guys in. um, that's good. That's good. Shoot, where was I? I had something else after that. Socratic questions. The logical positivists got me. I got triggered by them. Um, where were we going with that?
Another angle to motivate there is the idea that, when it comes to these questions, everyone's equally good at answering them.
Oh yeah,
That there are no experts
yeah,
in these domains. So you could think that without thinking they're nonsense domains, right? You could
right.
think that no, there are facts about morality, but morality is this kind of thing, whether it's a self-evident thing or it's a priori or it's just written on your conscience, like you said, that everyone's equally good at figuring out those answers. Then that would put pressure on the argument that says other people are better, let them do it instead.
Yeah,
I just think it's not plausible that we're all in an equally good epistemic position with regard to these questions. So the standard, them being a priori, I think doesn't really help. Like math is a priori, doesn't, but are people better at math than other people? Yes.
mm,
I'm really bad at it. So, if someone said to me, like, those mathematical truths, they're right there, they're equally accessible to you, I think, no, I mean, maybe they're there and maybe they're there for me to access, but it's going to take a lot of work for
yeah.
me to get there. And it's going to be really easy for someone else to get there. So they're not equally accessible. And I think the same thing's true, with morality and moral facts. Maybe there's some sense in which they're there for everyone to discover, but some people are better equipped to make those discoveries than other people.
Mm. Yeah. I wonder what impact this has on Pascal's wager. So, um, one objection to Pascal's wager is, what if I'm wagering on the wrong god? It's maybe it's just it's just a particular case of the general same problem. Uh, Knowing who to trust when it comes to different theologians, I guess, right? So, like, I wonder if there's a swamping argument here that stops Pascal's wager, because look at all the disagreement amongst the religions that I'm trying to pick, and then even in those religions, there's also all these different experts who disagree with each other, and so maybe I have a swamping reason to not take Pascal's wager.
Well, I mean, so I haven't thought about this, but I think it
And here comes Liz Jackson. Yeah, we're
I
gonna bring
think
her
I
in.
think it would really actually I think it'd go the other way, where the argument would really set up Pascal's wager, right? So you look at the intellectual diversity, right? You think about which people are most likely to get it right about God's existence, and you see they're all over the map. There's atheists, agnostics, there's theists, and of the theists, there's all kinds of differences, and even of the atheists, there's all kinds of other religious differences. So I mean, it's a plausible case for there's a state of disarray amongst the relevant experts, which would lead to it being rational for you to suspend judgment, right? That you thinking about it for yourself isn't gonna, it's not going to be reasonable for you to think, well, as long as I think about it for myself, I'm going to come to a reasonable conclusion, given what you know about the intellectual diversity. But I take it that Pascal's wager, like, that's the launching point, right? Because he's like, whether it's true that God exists, 50-50, right? Or, something like that. It's a can't figure that out. Then think about the practical consequences. So it's not an epistemic argument, right? It's a pragmatic argument. And so I'm concerned with, like, it being epistemically okay. So the epistemically okay to not think for yourself. Maybe, I think, given what I say, the epistemic thing for you to do is to suspend judgment. It's compatible with that the pragmatic thing for you to do is to believe something or to do something, because that might be what has the best upshot given the intellectual position that you're in. So I mean, my main focus is just what's that intellectual position.
Yeah.
But I don't see anything that I say there as being incompatible with, say, Pascal's wager. If anything, I think it sets it up.
That's fascinating, man. This all helps, clarify your position more for me too. This is really good. I am so allergic to pragmatic stuff because that's who I am.
Me too. It's too hard.
Yeah, I want to be just the armchair guy. I love
Yeah.
a good armchair and some rationalism. So I haven't thought a bunch about, like, pragmatic, I don't know if you call them pragmatic reasons even for action and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't go there. So it seems to me like if you have a reason to suspend judgment and then you're acting for a pragmatic reason, that sounds like it's still a reason. That still sounds like it's epistemic to me.
No. No. So here's, I think, the clearest case. This just steals from Feldman's paper on religious disagreement. But, like,
Yeah.
suppose you come to a fork, and you're going to a party. You're driving to a party, and you come to a fork in the road, and you don't know if it's left or right. Suppose your evidence is, 50-50, 50
Yeah.
that it's left, 50 that's right. Is it rational to believe that you should go left? No. Is it rational to believe that you should go right? No. You should suspend judgment. But what you shouldn't do is live out the rest of your days at that fork in the road, right? And just die there. You have a pragmatic reason to just take one of the roads. You have no better reason to take one over the other, but you might as well you have a pragmatic reason to just take one. But as you're taking one, so suppose you're like, okay, fine, I'll go right. As you're taking that route, it's not rational for you to believe that you're on the right path, right? So the epistemic reasons are still lacking. It's just you have a pragmatic reason to go this way because you have to go somewhere.
Is it would it be a non-rational reason or an irrational reason?
Given that you're talking reasons, reasons are just the things that make things rational. What I would just say is like, but it's in a different domain,
So
right?
that's
So
the
you
thing
have
that
your domain
confuses
of
me.
epistemic reasons.
Yeah, the
They
domains.
point to truth and falsity,
Yeah, what does pragmatic reasons point to?
like your benefit. I guess that's a complicated question. I guess you
Yeah.
can have different views, but it's mostly about like what goes best for you. And so what definitely doesn't go best for you is waiting out the rest of your life at the fork in the road. So take one.
Yeah.
But when you take one, you have no better reason to think it's true that that's the right way to go.
Does that make it an irrational action though? Because you're not acting for like, you know what I mean? It in the domain of
Yeah.
knowledge, I guess. Does that make it irrational that you chose right over left? You had no positive epistemic reason to choose that.
Yeah.
Is that action informed by? It seems like it's informed by your non-reason to act.
So, I think there are definitely going to be, just like with the epistemic moral stuff, that there's hard connections there. I think there's going
Yeah.
to be hard connections between epistemic and pragmatic stuff. And obviously there's the pragmatic encroachment stuff that's in the other direction, which says
Yeah.
like the pragmatic stuff can affect the epistemic stuff. But yeah, I think that there are probably some cases where the answer to what is it epistemically rational for you to believe is going to make an effect for what's pragmatically rational.
Okay.
But what's I think important for this case is even when the epistemic reasons are awash, they don't eliminate all your pragmatic reasons, right? You still got to do something.
Okay.
And so that's where I think like the William James like will to believe stuff, where there's a lack of parallel between the practical action case and the belief case, because his case is like, either you take an umbrella or you don't, either you propose or you don't propose. Belief's not like that, right? You can believe, you can disbelieve, but you can also suspend.
Yeah.
There's no suspending in action, because that's just not doing it. So he's right there that there's something different about action, that there's no sort of neutral state. But what's different, I think, is in the intellectual realm, there is this neutral state of withholding. And so the two kinds of reasons, I think, at least can come apart in those cases.
Yeah. Okay. That's tricky. I gotta look up some pragmatic stuff. I guess I gotta dive in deeper. Unfortunately, or maybe I'll just trust the experts on that. Yeah, I'm not worried
That's
about
okay.
it. Yeah.
That's okay.
Okay. Maybe the last one here would be instances of self-knowledge. So maybe I'm going to my therapist, and they're an expert in dealing with people, and I tell my therapist this is how I'm feeling, and they say, "No, you're not. You're feeling this way." Um,
Yeah.
Is it rational, like in instances of self-knowledge, for me to is it okay for me to not think for myself when it comes to my own thoughts? So this is different than the history stuff that you brought up
Yeah.
about my own history or my own surroundings. This is like self-knowledge, but this is an expert in self-knowledge. Or not, this is an expert in dealing with psychology,
Yeah.
and I'm a psychological being, I guess.
So, I think it comes down to when we get the particular question narrowed down, like, what is Parker feeling right now?
Mm,
How do we comparatively rate the epistemic position of you versus your therapist?
yeah.
Right. So on the one hand, you have like direct access to all kinds of the phenomenological states.
Yeah.
Right. But on the other hand, like you have biases and you have blind spots, and there are ways in which your therapist can better understand you than you see yourself.
Right.
Right. So I don't want to say that it's always going to be that you're in a better epistemic position. And I don't want to say it's always going to be that the therapist is in this case. So it's going to depend. Like if the question is like, are you in intense searing pain right now? Like, I think it's really hard for me to imagine any possible case where someone else is in a better position than I am to determine that. Right. But it's not too hard to think of a case where I might think that, that I'm happy or that I'm not anxious, and my wife think that I am, and then me come to realize, oh yeah, she actually is better understanding my thoughts and behavior, that I wasn't even aware of this sort of mental state that I was in, that she had a better access to that than I did.
Yeah.
So I think it can go, it can come apart. I mean, I think cases about your own psychology are probably some of the strongest cases for where ones where you're in the best position. But I think it's not even a guarantee, right? You can at least build the case out right where someone else could even be in a better position than you are, and recognizably from your perspective, like where you can be, when you can recognizably think, oh no, actually it seems this way to me, my own mental life seems this way to me, but maybe someone else is more trustworthy about in answering that question than I am myself.
Yeah. I can imagine. I with the pain one, I guess. If your eyes are closed, or in your I don't know, in a sensory deprivation tank or something, and someone's either tickling your big toe with a feather or poking it with a needle and saying like, "Hey, are you in pain or are you experiencing a tickle?" And you being like, "Well, a tickle." And like, "No, I actually you should be, pain because I'm stabbing you with a
Yeah,
gently." But in the case of like self-consciousness or something, it's like if oh, I don't know. If an eliminativist says, "Hey, look, man, I study the brain and I know this stuff way more than you do, and I'm telling you that your consciousness is an illusion." Um, what do I do here? Do I defer to
yeah,
them?
yeah. No, I mean, that's a good case where I feel like uh, no one is in a better position than I am to determine that I am conscious right now. And
Nice.
so it's hard. I feel no pull to defer or to doubt myself in a case like that.
So is that? I mean, is that one case where it's not okay to not think for yourself?
Hold on, there's a lot of negations there. It's
So-
not
is that a case where you must think
where
for
you have
yourself?
to think for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true that thinking for yourself will be the best route to your answer.
So if that's your goal, I guess. So now
It's
it's like
better, but I
contingent.
mean, so but part of what I want to say, especially in the understanding chapters, like you're not always required to do your best. Like
Ah,
there's intellectually good enough that falls short of best, because think of it this way, you can always do intellectually better, right? You can always gather more evidence, you can always think about it more, you can always double check, triple check, quadruple check, you can always make it better. But at some point it's good enough.
all the type A people are biting their fingernails right now, freaking out. What do you mean? I could have done better on my paper? Yeah.
You can
Okay.
always do. I mean, I mean, I think that goes both ways. But that is like my number one piece of advice to students is like your paper can always get better. Like
Hmm.
in one sense, that sounds bad, but in another sense, it should be a relief, because no matter how good it gets, it will always be able to get better. And so your job is to get your paper as good as you can until you get some arbitrary deadline where you have to do something with it. But you're never going to make it perfect, because there's no such thing. It can always get better.
Yeah, and especially if you use Chat GPT, and it's okay. It's okay to not think for yourself. Then, you know, all your students are just going to be
This
using
was
Chat.
not an endorsement of that. No, that was
That's good, man. Well, I always love talking with you because there's so many just random things that you help me with too. In epistemology, I'm so fascinated by it insofar as it connects to philosophy of mind, and then other areas I'm like, oh man, I'm just so deep that I don't know what I'm talking about. So I always appreciate you being the philosophical midwife and helping me with epistemology. The book's really good. Like I said, it's a struggle because the Socratic questions, especially, I'm like, no, but it makes you think, and it's really good. I think you're probably right. So I think it may be okay to not think about this anymore for myself. But
but I
and-
don't I don't want that. So I mean, I do kind of, someone once referred to the project as like kind of a trolling project, because I do want people to think for themselves about the topic. So in some sense, like what's more engaging to think about for yourself than the idea that you don't even need to do it, right? So like
yeah,
there's something, like you said, provocative, triggering, which hopefully makes you wrestle with these arguments and think about it. And I think it goes better when you do that. I just don't think you're required to do that. So I
yeah,
mean, as much as I'd like my book to be required reading, I think it's optional. It's okay if you don't, but
yeah.
happy if you do.
So good. And the cover is actually amazing. So again, folks, it is Why It's Okay Not to Think for Yourself. And I'll drop a link in the description. If you use that link, you can support this podcast because it's an affiliate link. So do go and grab that. That's awesome. Um, John, man, if people wanted to find out more from you, more of your work, can they find your stuff somewhere?
Sure. I mean, I have a site on Phil Papers. I have a personal website. If you just Google in my name, it should show up, and I have links to papers and books. But send an email too. I'm always happy to converse with people who are interested in these ideas.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll drop a link to your stuff in the description. So folks, wherever you're listening, go check the description and find more from Dr. John Matheson. All right, that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.